Example 1-6 graph. M of x equals, we have two pieces here for this piecewise. The first piece is negative x only when x is less than 0, students. And the second piece is x when x is bigger than or equal to 0. So we will make a chart. This is your first piece. We are going to pick 0. Well, 0, when you substitute this in, it's still going to be 0. And then we can pick another value such as negative 1. When we substitute it in, this is a negative 1 already in front, okay? And if we substitute in negative 1 for x, negative 1 times negative 1, student, that would be a positive 1. And then we can try negative 2. It's going to be a positive 2 because, again, negative 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. And we can do a couple more just to get a nice straight line. And negative 3 times a negative 1 in the front, that will give us 3. So we can go and plot a dot, 0 open circle, negative 1 up 1, negative 2 up 2, negative 3 up 3, and as you can see, there is a pattern here. And we can pick negative 10, and that would still give us a positive 10. And that is a nice straight line. So when we go and do the other piece, right side, which is piece number 2, we will start at 0, knowing that it's going to be a closed circle. Well, if x is 0, y is also 0. If x is 1, y is 1. If x is 5, y is 5, and so on and so on. We already have an open circle at 0, 0, but because this is closed, that will fill it up. 1 is 1, 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5, and as you can see, we have another nice straight line. These two straight lines, students, they form a V shape. And this V shape looks beautiful. And guess what, students? These two piecewise, it's form a V shape, and it's also known as y equals an absolute value of x, because whatever x we plugged in, the y was always positive. That's why it's also known as an absolute value function. Okay, so this absolute value function, students, has a vertex. Remember, vertex is the lowest point, and in this case, you can see that is at 0, 0. This is the vertex, and it's a point, so we want it to be x comma y. Okay. The domain of this is all real numbers or interval notation, negative infinity to infinity. We have an axis of symmetry right here. This is your axis of symmetry. It folds axis of symmetry. When you fold it, the left and the right, they form exactly, they look exactly the same. So we call this x equals to 0. Your range, students, is y is bigger than or equal to 0 because at 0, 0 it's inclusive, or interval notation 0 all the way up to positive infinity with bracket at 0. The rate of change is very fancy for slope. Over here we have a slope of 1, but over here on the left, students, we have a slope of a negative 1. So we have a positive and a negative slope of 1. Increasing, it's on the right side. So as you can see, this is my hiking up, right? And that's going to be from 0 all the way to infinity. So increasing 0 to infinity. Now, if we look at this writing right here, technically we're going to use a bracket. Okay, just like that. Decreasing, it's on the left side. This is when we sliding down, okay? So that's negative infinity to 0. Now, but I want to bring this up. When we graph absolute value function, student, you can use parentheses for increase and decrease, just like this, or you can actually use bracket, okay? Because it's going to be one continuous piece. So this one's okay to use bracket or parentheses. We are going to look at the x-intercept, and the x and y-intercept, they both exactly at the same spot at 0, 0. We have a minimum because it's the lowest point. So the vertex, students, is either a minimum or maximum. In this case, it's opening upward, so it's going to be a minimum. And the minimum, we only use y value, okay? Y value. So it's the maximum. So it's going to be a y value of 0. Maximum is NA because we cannot pinpoint the highest since this keeps going up forever. Now, is this a function? It's definitely a function, and it's not a one-to-one function, student, and here's the reason why. A one-to-one function, remember, it has to, every single y value can only come out to be 1x. But look, if I were to draw this line at y goes to 3, I got 1x here and 2x here. So this is not a function. So a one-to-one is a big no, okay? So to test if it's a one-to-one, I also want to bring it up. It passes the horizontal line test, okay? Passes horizontal line test. So here are some guidelines, students, of how to solve an absolute value equation. First step is always try to isolate, that means get the absolute value by itself. Then second, we want to create two equations, okay? The first equation, let's call this A. One equation, one question, ooh, don't do that. One equation, cross that out and write equation. One equation with a positive answer, and let's call the second one B, and another equation with a negative answer. So you can have two equations, okay? Let's apply that immediately here. For example, 2 to 5, it said solve. So example 2 says absolute value, okay? You see an absolute value symbol, so make sure we try to isolate that. So this is how you read this. -5 times the absolute value of n plus 10 equals -10. First step, we want to isolate the absolute value by dividing both sides by this number in the front, like this. So that would cancel out. So now we have an absolute value of n plus 10 equals -10 divided by -5 is a 2. Remember, we have to write two equations. One is, if we read over here, an equation with a positive answer. So a positive answer is a 2. This is your answer here, so that's a 2. So it's kind of like this. So everything looks exactly the same except the absolute value. Then your second equation, inside it will look exactly the same, but outside is now a negative answer. And then you solve normally, like your basic algebra, right? So -10 to both sides. It's going to say n equals -8, and then -10 to both sides, and then it's going to say n equals -12. So we are going to box one answer. N is -8, comma, -12, just like that. Let's do the same thing to example number 3. First, remember, we want to isolate your absolute value by subtracting both sides by a -28. This will give us a negative in the front. Absolute value, 4x plus 4. If you ever see a negative in the front, students, put a -1 in there so that you know that you need to divide both sides by a -1. 20 minus 28 is going to be -8. And just like the first example, in example 2 I meant, we are going to isolate it still, meaning that we need to divide both sides by that -1. So this is going to be a +8. Write two equations. The first one is exactly the way it looks with the +8. The second is going to be exactly the way it looks on the inside, but this is now a -8. And then now we solve. So we're -4 from both sides, just like this. So 4x equals 4, divide both sides by 4, x is 1. -4 from both sides, 4x equals -12, divide both sides by 4, x is going to be -3. And we write our answer using a box. Let me erase this because I need space. Okay, box both of them up. X equals 1, comma, -3. Let's go to example 4. Example 4 says, okay, 3 minus the absolute value of 1 minus 6n equals 46. So let's subtract 3 from both sides. And so we have a negative absolute value, 1 minus 6n, close it, equals 43. Now again, put a -1. Okay, if you see a negative and you think you're not going to remember to divide both sides by a negative, then put a -1 so you can divide both sides by a -1. So now we have an absolute value of 1 minus 6n, close it up, equals a -43. Here is the dilemma. Remember, we talked about how an absolute value can never be negative. Let's roll that up so we can see in your notes, okay? Okay, so here is when we talked about an absolute value cannot be negative because distance cannot be negative. So once you guys are done isolating your absolute value and it's equaling to a negative number, you can stop and you can say no solution. Okay, let's do example number 5. Again, isolate the absolute value. So this one is read, absolute value of 3v minus 2 all over 5 equals 4. To get rid of fractions, students, we will multiply both sides by the lowest common denominator. In this case, we only have one denominator, 5, so we need to get rid of that. So those will cancel. Absolute value of v minus 2 equals 20. So what I would like for you to do right now is take a minute and solve this. Once you're done solving it, I would like for you to write your answer. V equals something, comma, something, and box that up.